Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 6th edition of Snuneymuxw Culture and Lives Led. Today we are joined with Bill White, Snuneymuxw Elder, and Dave Bodaly, Snuneymuxw Knowledge Keeper. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dave Bodaly to do the formal introductions.
Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. In our cultural language, we bring our hands in front of us and we shake them twice and say Haichka, means thank you. Thank you for each of you being here, spending the time to be part of us. We're honored today to welcome to the Snuneymuxw territory of our Gabriola area. But we're honored to have my cousin and our elder from Snuneymuxw, Bill White, that will be speaking with us today. And so without further ado, I'll pass it on to Bill and let him take it away. So I'm going to put mine just on the image.
Good afternoon, people. I'm very pleased to be here. We do have, how long do we have? Is it 2 hours?
About an hour, hour and a half.
Okay. We have a couple of PowerPoints to share with you. One, basically, which is based on questions that children sent in wanting to know about our people. What do we do for language? What do we do for culture? And so that's the first PowerPoint.
But it won't make any difference at all.
The second PowerPoint is it identifies the work of women gathering tules. Those are the two options we have. I have been working with the traditionally trained elders since the 70s, beginning on our own reserve with the Cultural Research Project, and during my time at the school district in the 70s, and then at the University of Victoria, where I was the Aboriginal Liaison Officer for 10 years. I have been, since retirement, doing consulting work, basically around strengthening traditions, values, and history. Currently, I have about 10 projects on my plate, and most of which is to talk about and write about and research about our traditions and culture. Our mom was a product of the Indian Residential School in Kuper Island. Because of what happened to her there, she didn't want her children to be hurt and didn't teach us the language. We are slowly picking up language, and I used some language in the PowerPoints. The PowerPoints that you are going to see were built originally for young people, to help young people recognize strengths, traditions, and to use language. Are folks going to introduce themselves or no?
Not for this presentation.
Oh, okay, that's fine. So I am, I think we should just begin. During the PowerPoint, I'll add stories in addition to the script you're going to see. This is in Halkameetnam, know where you come from. Stadelstuknieten Ansa. And because pairs in our culture are important, 2, 4, 6, 8, the script has been repeated twice, okay? This is an archival photograph from people from Esquimalt. We have relatives from Esquimalt. I think in particular members of the Good family are married down there. This is a perfect example of women who've been hired by a family to prepare, and usually in this case, I suspect they're laying down blankets on which people who are about to be named, as they are shifting from one energy to another, the women will lay down blankets, and people, young children, young women, young men, will be escorted by other men or women onto the blanket in order to receive their traditional names. Next, please. Now, on the right-hand side, the yellow portion is a list of questions that were raised by grade 11 and 12 students. And so in order to help them understand and to respond to their interests, their questions are listed. Some of them may be of interest to you. And with this photo, I usually, when we first used it, I asked the young people if they had seen women folding blankets. And I asked them why were they doing that? And I asked who hired them to do that. Okay. Next, please. This is a potlatch in Duncan. This is usually there are potlatches in the, this is a memorial potlatch. It looks like men walking in the middle. They are carrying a photograph of the deceased. Just to the left of, just to their right, and in front of the two men standing are effigies of the deceased. Right behind them is an unusually large swakwath nobility blanket used as a screen. The swakwath nobility blanket is at least 8,000 years old, and it is owned by the families. I think Jack Wise on our own reserve owns one of these from his grandparents or great-grandparents' time. The people on the right-hand side have come to witness in this case, a memorial. This is a memorial potlatch, identified here as a commemorative potlatch, but it's really a memorial. This is, the memorial potlatch is meant to signify the end of mourning. So it's the community which announces that this is the person who passed away. This was his Indian name, and they are formally announcing we are using our traditions to formally end the cycle of mourning. Next, please. Kwam kwam with Squalawin, make your mind strong. When the two in front, right in the middle, holding the picture, I asked young people, why are they wearing those blankets? And I asked the young people, again, I already explained to you, when is a commemorative potlatch held? Usually it's 4 years after every passing. And our old people, part of the teachings from our old people was that normally it takes about 4 years to prepare for a memorial. And as a family prepares a memorial, which entails saving up blankets, hiring specialists, hiring workers, and there might be 20 or so people to 30 who are hired by the family to conduct a memorial potlatch. The question about the two wearing the blankets, that's the two individuals carrying a blanket, or carrying the picture rather, the blanket identifies they've been hired by the family. The blanket identifies that as this is a transition moment, in fact, ancestors are being brought forward and the blanket protects them. The blanket that they are wearing and the blanket in the back is made by, normally only noble women made them. And initially it would take a woman about a month to make the blanket. Her tools were carved by men, but for the most part, only women wove the blanket. And it is a reflection of the only noble women wove the blanket. Next, please. I'll let you read this. Unless I'm mistaken, the script at the very top, Stadelstukwanten Snee means know where you are. In terms of our rites, rituals, and ceremonies, whether it's the mask dance, the winter dance, the Shaker Church, Wayne Suttles, who worked in the Salish region, who's since passed, sadly, from his informants, understood that the value, in terms of our culture, what was important was the value of vision, the ritual word, and the ancestors was reflected in wealth. These things were our wealth. The value of vision comes from participation in the wilderness, for example. Hence the value of our connections to the wilderness. Next, please. I'll let you read this. When we were teenagers at community or family gatherings, we used to have 8 or 10 old people rise, and in the course of speaking to us, they always, when talking to us, said that we had to use the best of both worlds. They raised one arm and they said, we have to know our own traditions and culture. Put it down, they raised the other and they said, we have to understand and use the teachings of the Juanita white people. In the photograph, Dr. Samuel Sam, a recipient of the Order of Canada. His wife was from Nanaimo, from the Fraser family. He's the person on the right. His father's wife apparently was from Nanaimo, and a sister of, I think it's Al Wise from Nanaimo. So these are very close relative. The person right in the middle is a specialist called Queequels, who speaks in our language and is hired for his ability to explain things to the people. The people standing in the background are on the far left, our left. The second is Chief Adam Dick. Chief Adam Dick from the north, who was formally invited by Samuel Sam to help with honoring graduates at the University of Victoria. And after question number 18, I asked the children who uses Facebook, who checks websites, and who has a cell phone. I've noticed, for example, that historically in the 60s and the 70s, our people had major problems with English and math, and we didn't grow up reading and writing. That's changed significantly with Facebook and with texting on the cell phone. So that answers in part question 70. I was asked how many First Nation languages do I speak, and the short answer is none, which is unfortunate. I went to a sidebar. I went to South Africa twice to work with tribals with my colleague, Dr. Philip Cook, in the late 90s rather. And we were down there to train social workers, lawyers, child and youth care workers about the convention, adopting the Convention on the Rights of the Child. In the course of our work in South Africa, we worked and met with young people who were in care, 14 and 15 years old. I was astounded because the young people we met, very young people, they spoke Afrikaner, English, and 2 tribal languages, and they were fluent in all 4, which was just absolutely amazing. And I barely spoke English. Number 12, question 12. What is the best thing about being First Nation? Several. One is that we come from a traditional family, which meant our mother, who raised us as a widow, heavily reinforced values such as having respect for the old, sharing, cooperation, being quiet in the presence of elders, not talking too much, helping, etc. And those were the values that allowed us to understand our world and understand our rites and rituals. That was part of the answer for number 12. Are there any questions about the photo before we move along? Or questions about what you've heard?
We have one question. Are there books that have language translations?
There are, yes. You can get them from, you can order them from Cowichan Tribes. I think later on we'll probably send you the order form. And I do know that there are a number of, I think, what is his name? Wayne Suttles produced a dictionary for his work in the Musqueam area, which too is a Hulkmeetan speaking group, but it was about $150, so it's pretty expensive. Okay, sorry, that's not a great answer. In our culture, Soleil is the Hulkmeetan version for elder. So for those of you who are wanting to learn, this is meant to help you. So the elder Dan George, the Soleil Dan George, provides an example here of his thinking about being strong. One of the classic teachings that we learned from our old people as children and at public meetings and community meetings was that through all of our work, especially when darkness visits, they used the term Guam Guam Quith Guam Quam, which meant make your mind strong. This is in 1974 from his book My Heart Soars. For those of you who are very interested in the way that Coast Salish people, especially old people, talk, this is a phenomenal book. I can constantly search used bookstores for copies of his book. This quote from his is quite important. I'm doing some consulting work for about 3 Vancouver organizations. And this quote is particularly important because most of the people in the urban area are enduring major social breakdown, poverty, racism, and discrimination. And they don't have especially if they are urban, don't have the rites and rituals to protect and to surround. So in terms of my work with the community, I'm using quotes like this to help young people connect to our traditions and culture. This, of course, is a great photograph of Chief Dan George. Okay. I'll let you read this. One of the major challenges since the 60s and the 70s, particularly around acculturation, was the degree to which in our time as baby boomers, we read nothing about the Coast Salish or nothing about our traditions and our culture. We learned everything there was to know about English language and English history, Canadian history, such that during that period, the voices of our old people were substantially weakened. Yet the old people knew that you can write like white people, you can dress like white people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the bottom line is, for the most part, you may not be accepted by the white people. We certainly found that in terms of the recent major criticism of the health, the degree to which our people going into hospitals are badly treated, and as well in Cowichan, the racism which erupted after the Cowichan tribe identifying how many of its people are affected by the virus. And so we historically, racism and discrimination is worse for our people during low economic times. We certainly learned that in the 70s and well into today. Okay. The art on the far right is produced by Charles Elliott, who's from Sartlip. This is a phenomenal, and it was for me a profound example of what he was drawing. Of course, well, in the round was a what our people understood as a salsalton spindle whorl, and it was used by women to weave wool. There was a stick which ran through it. We understood, we were beginning to learn that art reflected power, and the images reflected power, the images reflected teaching. And in this case, when I picked up a print from Charles, not this one, but an earlier one, I asked him what those spikes were around his spindle whorl. And he told me that it represented the power of the spindle whorl. Which was a phenomenal understanding, so that pre-contact men who carved wood, men who carved tools for women, were in fact giving. They were praying. They were focused. Whilst they were carving, they were giving strength to her tools, and she, in turn, when she used it, she provided her prayers, her songs, her teachings, and she was. As mentioned, when she was weaving a nobility blanket, she was in seclusion for about a month whilst the blanket was being woven. And so we had a combination of men and a combination of women in order to produce a powerful, in case, a blanket to protect and to surround. Okay. Are there any questions about that before we move along?
Nothing in the chat at this time.
Okay. Classically, on the top, on the red top portion, our old people, when we were children, when we were young adults, when they stood in rows to address a large community meeting or family meeting, they always said, when we are gone, these are the things you will leave with your children. And so they were wanting the young people to listen and to listen intently. I know that about a year ago, Chief Mike Wise came to Duncan with another relative to invite me to sit on his elders advisory committee. And of course, the chief rarely travels that far, and he did it a formal way to invite participation. In the course of responding to him, I told him that I was, of course, honored that he asked me to sit on his advisory committee. In fact, I had been away from the community for about 20 years, even though I was a significant part of the leadership in the 70s. And I also told him, I said, well, you know, look, I want to be able to pass along whatever it is I know to the community, because I am getting old now. I'm at the age where this is important. The purpose of the big house, what we have here on the left hand, the photos on the left hand side, of course, big houses were places in which people lived. You might have 8 or 10 families living in a big house. Today, today amongst all the big houses from Nanaimo to Saanich to Duncan, Esquimalt, and the Lower Mainland are places in which memorials are held, initiations are held, naming is held, and validation of your Indian name, validation of your status, and all of our traditions like respect for the old, sharing, cooperation, helping one another, being kind are reinforced. These are the kind of values that are reinforced. We are just question 74 in conjunction with our work of recent. How far did the Cowichan people travel in their canoes? The people used to travel over to the mainland, south to Seattle, north of Seattle to Bellingham, for summer naming, for potlatches, and also to harvest seafood. The set of photographs, the third one all by itself, is an unusual photograph. It's a painting, really. The second missionary on our own reserve, Snuneymuxw, was Thomas Crosby, and here he captured a healer, a traditional healer, inside a longhouse, attempting to remove the darkness and to cleanse the body of, in this case, a client who was seriously ill. This is important because you have to understand that white people did not come to our territory until around 1849, and our old people didn't stand on the shores waiting for doctors and nurses, etc. We had our own specialists to conduct these things. Number 26, what is the most serious problem facing Aboriginal people today? Racism and discrimination, of course. Poverty. It struck me as pretty amazing that when I did my work in Malahat, I was teaching life skills. My role was to teach history and traditions. And so every day that I went to, Thursdays I went to deliver these teachings. And every time I went there, I passed a large private school, which was fenced off. And it was the school where the elite of the province sent their children, whether from senior government, Macmillan, Bodaly, et cetera, the absolute rich of our province. And so I passed their school on my way to Malahat. And I thought, you know, the people have serious poverty problems, issues. And here, right next to them, built on their own reserve, is this private school. And so I have been very conscious about the degree to which our lands and resources were taken for the benefit of newcomers who, when they arrived to our territory, did not own land, they did not own fishes, the resources of the sea. And as a matter of fact, when they left their own land in England, they didn't own any of these things there. And they believed that this was wilderness when they arrived here, and that wasn't the case. When they arrived to our territory, our nobles had villages already in place. That's it.
We have a question.
Sure.
Do the terms big house and long house have different meanings, or are they used interchangeably?
I use them interchangeably. So I'm comfortable with each. There are people who prefer one or the other, but I understand that it means the same thing.
Can I add to that a little bit? In the North, when I've talked to the people in the North, they always call their gathering, there's buildings, a big house. And in their big house, they often will have one side of the big house is for the chiefs and for the singers. and then the people would seat in the other 3 sides. Whereas in the Salish, we will have often the family at one end and all the other seats. So we have seats all the way around ours, and we'll often have more than 1 fire pit in the center. We have some of our longhouses have up to 3 fire pits, whereas in the Kwakwakwa, there's our big houses and they only have 1 fire in the center. So that's what I've found from my experience. Thank you.
I'll let you read Chief Seattle's a portion of his speech. This was written, he said this in 1854 in Seattle itself. His very lengthy speech is important because what he was talking about in terms of the land being sacred, our ancestors being sacred, grave sites being sacred, still has paramount value with our people today. We are the only people on the coast who continue to hire specialists to burn for the ancestors, to initiate, and healers. Other tribes north of us do not have this anymore. So we have an unbroken chain, really, within the Coast Salish region for these. I continue to refer to Chief Seattle's speech. Are there any questions about this? Luckily for you, I can't see your faces, or I'd ask you.
Bill, people are having a bit of trouble hearing you. Is there a way you can turn up your audio a bit?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, but it's quite soft.
Is it? You know, I talk that way. Okay, what I will do is I will adjust, see if I can adjust my volume. Did you hear that?
Apparently it was a bit better when you looked towards the screen where the camera is capturing you. Other people are saying the audio is good for them.
Move the camera closer.
I say we just continue.
Sure. Now, how is that? Is that better?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. I continue to be heavily influenced by Chief Seattle's 1854 speech, which talks about continuity of our traditions and our rights. How relevant and practiced are Native customs and traditions in today's community? Well, we are very, can you hear me now? Is that better? Can you hear me?
Yes, it's great.
Okay. Now, in the Coast Salish region, and sadly I don't have a map here, there is, it's relevant and practiced and practical, because in fact, there is a anthropologist, Barbara Lane, Wayne Suttles, and Pamela Amos, who in terms of their work with our old people, one of the things about our rites, rituals, and ceremonies is that these are practiced in order to maintain balance and in order to provide healing for the people. And so we've found that the practice of our rites and rituals provides a stability that no other can. Next slide, please. Michael Q, 1980. This quote is from an unusual Coast Salish exhibit held at the University of British Columbia. And he captures the question that others raised in terms of what is the value of our traditions. And Michael Q learned from our old people what that was. On the far right is that, sadly, if COVID wasn't here, our winter dances would be well underway and there would be 1,000 people gathering at selected longhouses to conduct memorials, initiations, announce names and rites and rituals, reinforce our values such as respect for the old, sharing, cooperation, etc. So the traditions and values are fairly strong within the Coast Salish region, more than any other. There is we are coming out of what Dan George called the great sadness in terms of the loss of language. There are significant initiatives today in terms of teaching the language again. I am not that familiar with the programs like that. The question 42, how do you pass down culture for younger generations? One, when you think about Michael Q's quote, maintaining respect and status in the eyes of the wider community, children often are brought to winter dances and children see their parents, their grandparents, and their relatives conducting memorials, initiations, and they learn our values about helping others, taking care of others, standing with relatives, and so they learn that value, and that's how culture is passed down through watching and then through participation.
I have some questions for you, Bill.
Sure.
Were there longhouses on Gabriola?
There were significant longhouses on Gabriola. I think what is called Indian Point. I just saw an archival photograph within the last 6 months, and there were 8 or 10 longhouses on Indian Point. We went, members of the Chiefs Elders Advisory Council Committee, we went to petroglyph sites, and we were told and shown a place where a longhouse was close to the petroglyphs, and as well we were shown I suspect there was 3 or 4 areas where longhouses were.
Another question. Is it acceptable for white people to want to learn the language and spirituality of First Nations in order to live their lives these ways?
Yeah. I think it's important to understand the living traditions and living values. The challenge with the teaching of the core spiritual values represents power and change. And it can be dangerous for white people if they don't have a living culture and or elders to help with the transition. I think that we are, however, in a time when it's important to, our grandparents and parents always worked with white people, not many, to help with understanding who we are. I think I have had, in the course of my work, 4 students who were white, in order to help with understanding our rites, rituals, and values.
I have a question for you, Bill.
The difficulty with passing along the traditions is that white people tend to be highly individualistic compared to us, and they will develop a sense of ownership when you do not have a sense of ownership, shouldn't have a sense of ownership. That's a problem. Go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting. I can't see you, so it's difficult. You talked a little bit about COVID, and I'm very curious on how community is navigating COVID as far as not being able to perform rites and rituals. We're all jumping on Zoom and doing whatever we can on platforms such as Zoom, but I would imagine that's a very poor substitute for gathering together. Is everything just being delayed until COVID it's safe for people to gather?
For the most part, winter dance activities, naming activities, memorials are being delayed until after the COVID period. I know that with my younger sister, who was going, we were planning on naming children, naming grandchildren really this coming year, that we put it off until the time is safer to do that. I think it's a huge challenge with not being able to come together, because that the winter dances, the Shaker Church, again, if they're both seen as healing institutions, young people and families are not able to reinforce core values such as respect for the old, sharing, cooperation, helping one another, knowing we're connected to all living things, to the natural and supernatural world, has to take a break. So.
I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a moment so Dave can share a photo of longhouses on Gabriola. So just a moment. And we'll go over to Dave.
Okay, so this is looking at Indian Point from the Degnan Bay, and you can see past the point here where we would look towards Vancouver Island or towards out in Yellow Point area. And this is where the longhouses were located all along there. And it goes way back into the forest where it's now forest. But it's the only photo we had, so I tried to enlarge it up to share that there was, I would say there would be at least 10 houses in a row at this time. This was taken in the 1930s when someone went by on a boat and took a picture of it. And that's unfortunately is the only photo we have of the longhouses. One other thing I wanted to share also was the Snuneymuxw is that book called The Snuneymuxw People. And that's over on El Dorado Drive, is it? Just that long drive between Mudge Island and Gabriola Island. And that's where these artifacts are dug up, and that's where this book was written. So that's one of the names we have for Gabriola. But there, I think there's 17 names in total of all the places.
Dave?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Would you hold that book up again, but only raise it just a bit so we can see the full picture?
Okay.
Now, in the 80s, when I was at the, can you hear me? In the 80s, when I was at the University of Victoria as a mature student, a small group of us worked with a woman in our language called the Siyawa, which is a seer. And I asked her this is made of coal. And I asked her if she could find out through the ancestors, which is a direct channel, what this was used for. And she told us that it was a pendant used by the person who was responsible for maintaining fire. This is a significant understanding of the value and use of coal.
Wow.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Thank you for that. And that was a book published by the museum, and it's no longer in publish. So if anyone can ever find one in a used bookstore, it's one to hang on to. It's got some amazing resource material in it. Thank you for that info, Bill.
Okay, I'm going to share the screen again to get back to the PowerPoint.
What you're seeing is in terms of the language. I am not I am a second generation victim, if you will, of the Indian residential school. And my role is to work with young people. And so what we have here is that you'll notice that in this PowerPoint, I'm repeating the same phrase as often as possible. This was meant to help young people when they're reading English to begin to learn how to use our language in a new way. Statel stuk niet en unsa is one of the ways in how this is. How would you frame that? Oh, hey, yeah, we can pass this one now. Next, yeah. Every time in the 70s, when I worked for the school district in Nanaimo, and then again in the late 80s when I worked for the University of Victoria, I relied heavily on Dan George's My Heart Soars. My job for both was to present workshops for teachers and for students. Before I went to present workshops, I read Dan George's book. It's easily read 10 to 15 minutes before I went on. And basically, I loved his book. This is for those of you who want to learn more about our people. I loved how he wrote the way our old people talked. And I thought this was important, this was significant. The image on the right is a carving by the eminent Coast Salish artist from Sartlip called Charles Elliott. And in the late 70s, I asked him to reproduce this pre-1900 spindle whorl. The spindle whorl called Salt Sultan was carved by men for women. In this case, what it shows is the importance of women's work. And so the carver, in this case, a man, carved a pair of sea wolves. In our culture, things should be in pairs. So here we had sea wolves and the human figure in the middle, which was a man. And so what we have is that he created tools for women, and he was either using songs or prayers that were supernatural in character, and placed those on the carving for the woman. So when he carved it and gave it to the woman, it was a tool of power and from his nobility. If you were, this script in the blue, I'd like each of you to read it. And then I'd like 3 or 4 of you to talk to me about that script. What do you think it means? Or what is important to you about that script? I'm counting 10, 9, 8.
Can I say something?
Sure.
This is Sybil.
Okay.
I've always been struck by the peace in a gentle manner. And I think that's something that has been very hard for certainly me as a white settler to learn. And I reflected in my life as kindness. That's the way to live in a gentle manner. But I would say it's been a learning that I continue to learn.
Can you say anything else about that, please, Sybil?
I
loved it. Thank you. It's important.
When I've been in Indigenous community, when I've been one of the very few white faces in a brown crowd, my experience of that gentle manner was seen in the intergenerational way of being and learning to be in service and support for elders, and be in community in a way that I hadn't experienced as a white person, and from an immigrant family, of having all of those generations. And then to see this, we have always done things in a gentle manner, just so reflects some of the quiet ways that I've seen that gentleness shown when I've had the honor of being in an environment with mostly Indigenous people, and see that lived.
That's very helpful and important, Sybil. What communities were you speaking about now?
I lived in the Yukon for a decade, and
Oh.
I spent time with the Gwich'in people, the Dene people, Casca Dene people, and the Shoshone people, and some Tlingit people as well. I traveled a lot within the Yukon, and I have a daughter who's a member of the Vuntut Gwich'in First Nation. So I had many chances to be that with her family and with other friends and family in different communities in the Yukon.
Thank you. That's very exciting, and I loved your reflections. Thank you, Sybil. Anyone else? Is that Mars?
It makes me think about what you said, Bill, earlier about the individualism that is so ingrained in white people and white culture. And I'm a descendant of white settlers myself, and it makes me think about the ways in which whiteness directs us out and toward external goals. And this quote to me speaks about looking internally and looking toward your own ancestry and your ancestors for your guidance and your answers. And I think it's really beautiful.
And it is a precursor to the ability to learn songs, to watch, and if your family comes from a ritual family, one of the end results of that teaching is that if you are going to be a ritual worker, a sacred worker, a healer, you have to learn. Old people would teach you, but you have to begin the process, and they would say you can't hold on to darkness, you can't hold on to sorrow, you can't hold on to healing, and all of that plethora of things that cause hurt. If you are not able to let go of those things, they say that you can bring illness towards yourself or hurt others when you are healing. And so if you normally, if you are mouthy, abusive, or loud, or the old people, you wouldn't even have to speak. The old people would look at you, and they would feel that maybe there's some sort of sadness or hurt. They might be able to define it, and they would very kindly move you back so that you don't pollute the sacred workers, the singers, the healers, etc. Thank you, Mars. That was important. Anyone else, please? Heather Menzies at the bottom of my screen here. Can you help out? Wow, hi. Thoughts on that quote, the quotes, please, Heather? Can't hear you. Ooh.
We do have a question.
Oh, sure.
Does the "you too must follow" refer to the Indigenous audience or to everyone?
In this case, Dan George, of course, he was speaking to, as all people. He is speaking about, he is speaking to young people. In the 70s, when this book was written, we had a suicide rate 6 times the national average. We had a unemployment rate that was at 70%. We had a dropout rate from kindergarten to grade 12 that was 95%. If we were lucky, for every 100 of us who went to public school, only 5 finished grade 12. And of that, only 1 or 2 went on to university. So given what he called the great darkness, the great sadness of suicide, later drinking, and there wasn't so much drugs then, he was talking about our young people needing to say it is you if you let it happen. And so much of our traditions reflected repetition of being strong, being careful, and knowing that you are loved and letting things go. And so he was attempting to help our young people by saying that you have to decide, we would like you to use our teachings if you let it happen. I know that any white people that I have worked with, I might give them 3 or 4 books and said to them, if you want to continue working with me, you have to read these books and you have to tell me all about it. And so when they explained their reactions to it, and I said, what darknesses do you have that prevents you from changing your life? And I said, name those darknesses, name those hurts that you carry. If you want to work with me, you need to name it. And so it wasn't as kind as Dan George in terms of if you let it happen. But at the same time, it's important in terms of if you're going to work with our people, our old people need to understand that you have an understanding of our traditions. Is that what you're asking, Carol? I didn't hear, can't hear you.
Sorry, that was from Frida.
Okay. So, did that answer you, Frida?
She says yes.
Okay. Okay. Let's have one more. Can we have one more person talk to you about this script? How many people are on the system right now?
We do have a comment from Jane.
Okay.
I am struck by him saying, you must follow the path of your own race.
Yes.
It reminds me of the Quran, where Allah says, I speak to each race in ways they will understand.
No. Can she add to that?
Jane, do you have more to add to that? If you want to speak to it, you can unmute.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, the intention behind it was that Allah was saying that you all come to me in different ways, but I speak to each race in a different kind of way with different kind of traditions, and so that it's interesting that Chief John George said just that you must follow the path of your own race, not my race, but your race, whatever that happens to be, in order to find your heart, basically. It's part of what I would say, in spirit.
I think in terms of tribal peoples, there is a consistency throughout the globe in terms of the application of values which assist with becoming strong, being kind, being generous, and not holding on to darkness. That's helpful, Jane. Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Otherwise, we'll move along. If you can, I would track this down and read it as often as you can. I love this phrase. I have been looking at Coast Salish art. Coast Salish art has almost been lost in modern times. And this is because places like Vancouver, Victoria, and Nanaimo are today very large urban areas. And our people were subjected to acculturation very early on, including the acculturation religions, the United Church, the Catholic Church, to rid us of our old traditions and values. Charles Eliot, Susan Point are one of the consistent artists who have continued to create art in a pre-contact way. On the far right, for example, is a Susan Point house post, and she uses classical images. I forgot where this one is located, but she has captured a beautiful Coast Salish face, and the arms uplifted. And at the very beginning, Dave talked about being thankful and being respectful of others by raising his hand, and this was found on the house post. I know in terms of our work with Bo, I'm in dialogue with Bo almost 3 or 4 times a week to look at the creation of combs using Coast Salish faces. Number 30, I was asked if I'd taken part in the carving of a totem pole. The short answer is no, and that's because I'm not talented. And number 38, do you think we will have Hulkaminam language in the future? I think that slowly innovations are being made around use of the language again. I think that number 20, there are significant initiatives around teaching of Hulkaminam in the schools that hasn't been done before. Number 59, what action should be taken to stop the loss of First Nations languages? I think that certainly political action, cultural action, administrative action to strengthen languages. I think that I am not a language speaker, but I have been saying to our administrators, when you look at this PowerPoint, look at how I'm using Hulkaminam language inside a PowerPoint, even if it's meant for a Western audience. And so I'm saying to our leaders, education administrators, we have to begin using Hulkaminam in our everyday paperwork. If we're going to save our languages, this is what we must do. Okay. Quianach Atom Squall CM. Have you heard? This is on the far right, left rather, your left is a quiquel or speaker, normally calls witnesses when a family begins their work. And I asked, I would ask children, I ask them, for those who go to the big houses, for those who participate in namings, memorials, etc. And they might, as children, have seen these things since they were 5 or 6. I said, why do families call on witnesses? And so I would ask them, young people, to name, to identify why they did that. And because children see these things from a very young age. The photograph here, I also asked them to look at the young boy or this picture, and I said, what is missing? What is missing from this? This was from a stunning Coast Salish exhibit at UBC in the late 70s. And the young people, the short answer, this was from a longhouse, an old longhouse about 1900. And the older longhouses had 1 or 2 rows, 1 or 2 rows of seats around the big house. And when I asked him, so you see that he's getting a new name, and because his life is changing, his transition is changing from a young man to a person with an Indian name, he is standing on blankets, in this case, a nobility blanket, to protect him during his journey. People standing before him, too, are wearing blankets, in this case, the white nobility blankets, and they are singing a song, and they are hired, there are specialists hired called Snuneymuxw rattlers to protect him, to guide him, and the community is witnessing from many, many communities, the Nanaimo, Cowichan, Saanich, etc., the Lower Fraser Valley, are witnessing his getting in name. What is missing from this photograph is that the young man would not have stood on the blankets without a blanket surrounding him. The blanket would have meant to protect and surround him as he was entering this new part of his life.
We have a comment regarding language from Ardith Cooper. She states, I have thought that a step in reconciliation locally would be the inclusion of place names in our language, and that would be a start.
This is so true. With the Simon Fraser project, we are looking at place names in the Gabriola and Nanaimo region in order to strengthen with young people place names and the translation from each. So what Ardith is saying is correct. Thank you. Anything else, Ardith? Ardith, who Dave tells me has ancestry in Nanaimo. Am I outing you, Ardith?
Yes, Ardith's mom is my mom's cousin from Snuneymuxw.
And your mom's name
from
is?
From the Wesley family.
Oh, okay. And so she's from the Wesley family?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, who are her parents?
Yeah.
Who are her parents?
Sorry, Anne Wesley comes from Weldon Wesley. And comes from Albert Wesley and Louisa Bobb, who comes from Mamie Wise.
Oh, okay. Unless I'm mistaken, and I'm not as skilled as you are, not by a long shot, Weldon Wesley's wife, I think, was my father's eldest sister, Emily.
That's right, yeah, Emily.
Yes. So very close there.
Yes.
Is there a reason, Ardith, we don't see your picture?
I can't figure it out.
Oh, okay. That's fine.
It's a new computer.
Oh, okay.
My father was Jim Cooper from Sauk.
That's right.
And my mother is Andrea Wesley from Snuneymuxw.
Okay. And Andrea's, again, remind me, because I'm not good at this, Andrea's parents were?
Andrew Wesley. And her mother died as a babe, when she was a babe. I think her name was Mary, I believe.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Thank you. Anything else, Ardith?
No, well, we also have family in Modeste in Duncan.
Yes, that's right.
And I remember Mom talking about family in Sechelt, Uncle Clarence.
Okay.
And I'm just struggling for his last name. It's a well-known Sechelt name, but I can't. It's gone out of my head right now.
Oh, okay. I know that feeling.
Yes.
Compared to Dave, in terms of knowledge of our relationships, I'm adult.
Well, you and I actually, we spent some time together 3 years ago at my sister Cheryl's place in Duncan.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes.
3 years ago.
Yes.
Yes.
For, my grandfather, George White, would say, for gosh sakes. Oh, thank you. How are we doing for time now, gang?
I think we can finish this slideshow.
Okay. Do you want to run through it or stop it? Oh, we can continue going then?
Yeah, we can continue going because there's not that many slides left.
Okay, let's continue, please. in the, this is shown to, initially quite a few years ago, it was shown to young people on the reserve. This is an archival photograph from the Provincial Museum for an interior shot of a longhouse, I think in Songhees. And I asked the young people, tell me what you see in this photo. I'll ask you guys. What do you see in this photo?
Cedar mats.
Yes. They're actually tules. Go ahead. Anything else?
Those cedar mats would be made out of reeds, and artist's grandmother, Susan Lazar, was famous for making those reed mats. And those ones on the wall look exactly like the ones she used to make in Souk.
Nice.
When I used to work at the Provincial Museum, she came up to the ethnology division and tried to talk Peter McNair into letting her cut some of the mats so that she could see how it was done.
I'm sure they agreed.
Yeah, they were enthusiastic about
yes,
that one.
Yes, yes.
What are the posts, the poles?
On this photo?
Yes.
I don't see any posts on mine.
Oh. What's in the middle of the picture?
It looks like a fire. Should I help you, gang? Dave, tell me what you see here.
Okay, no, it would be the sticks of maybe almost fishing rod or lines or gaffs or something.
Those. Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
Standing up.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else? Dave, tell me what you see here.
Okay.
I, Dave, Spirit Wolf Bodaly, see the following.
Well, it's inside the longhouse. If I could enlarge that picture, I would be able to probably see more in it, because sometimes enlarging it more would show more. And now, is that an individual that's looking away from the camera against the wall underneath the screen, or is that just part of the wall? I can't quite tell.
It does look like an individual.
Yeah, that's looking away, and their hair is touching a mat.
Yes. What I use this photograph for is because our old people in the longhouse usually say that children should not walk on the floor because energies of natural and supernatural energies and songs from ancestors have covered the floor. And so children are told not to run around on the floor or just to be careful. This photograph I particularly like because for me it represents a ghost. He wasn't identified on the original photograph. They did not identify Indian from Songhees, for example. It was just a Songhees longhouse. And so again, when you think about Chief Seattle's speech, 1854, we have a reflection here. Let's move along, please. I think I sort of covered that. This is the explanation. Now, this is I don't know what happened, but there is we grew up with Walt Disney. I'll let you read that. And the photograph that was supposed to go with it is a panel of Indians in classic 30s and 40s way in which Indians were drawn. And we were asked if we were offended by their depiction of Indians. And we saw it as children. I think we were 6 or 7. And the answer to this, has it bothered you how Disney depicted them with pure red skin and calling them savages? The short answer is no, because we knew, A, it was a cartoon. We knew, 2, that it wasn't our people. And we knew, 3, that it wasn't meant to depict historically correct. because we also knew that white people didn't fly, as did the three children. We also knew that they didn't encounter pirates either, and so we knew it wasn't real. And so I think that that's all I have to say about this. I was particularly challenged by the depiction of Indians in Salish territory who were not from our territory. We grew up going to public school, which portrayed Indians as either Haidas or Kwagyoth or Sioux. And so we understood that if you're going to be a real Indian, you had to be any of those. And I found those offensive because we didn't see any of our parents or grandparents. Okay. Since this PowerPoint was made, basically, well, I have a history degree, so there is significant progress being made in terms of land claims, recognition of territory, use of, I know that the eminent Dr. Barbara Lane, the anthropologist, whose dissertation called A Comparative and Analytic Study of Northwest Coast Indians, her dissertation published on demand in 1953, University of Washington. Barbara Lane, it was a result of her interview. She interviewed our old people about the use of land, the hunting sites, fishing sites, rites and rituals. And because of her significant historical anthropological work, we began to win court cases. I remember in the 70s when we were negotiating with the federal government, federal and provincial governments, they always sat across from us, lawyers and senior administrators, and they said to us things like, "Prove to us you own this land." And they sat back waiting for us to do that. And of course, we didn't, by that time, church and state had removed that knowledge from us. Barbara Lane, Dr. Barbara Lane, because of her ethnographic work in Washington State and British Columbia, she did the primary research for the Union of BC Indian Chiefs in the 70s. Because of her work, we began to win significant court cases. Today, when I advise our chief and council, remember I'm on the Elders Advisory Committee for Chief, I consistently say to them, when you are sitting in front of federal provincial government negotiators, you say to them, one, your people didn't arrive to our territories in 1849. They did not own any land or territories or resources here when they arrived. 3, they didn't own any resources, fishing, forestry, land from their own territory when they arrived. That's why they came here. And also you ask those negotiators, tell us when your people came here. And so I said, we need to begin doing that. The conditions in our reserves have improved. We still have major problems with, we are not sufficiently far away from the period when, remember I said we had a 95% dropout rate from kindergarten to grade 12. We had an unemployment rate of 60% to 70%. We had a suicide rate of 6 times the national average. And so there is much work to be done in terms of rebuilding. When the Europeans first arrived to our territory, we had a three-class system: nobles, commoners, and slaves. And so everyone, in the course of having rights and land removed, our nobles were stripped of their ancestry. This is on the right, it's in Finlayson Point in Victoria. It's unusual. It's one of the few villages that had a stockade built around it. Most of our villages did not. Okay, let's move along. sadly, Patrick Toohey, his book in 1999 is now out of print. I think you can get it copies on, is it Amazon or whatever the Canadian version is. I attempted to get in touch with him to have him reprint the book, which has substantial quotes from old people from Washington State. The photo is from Malahat, I think. That's it. Next one.
That is the end of the PowerPoint presentation. And I had one question that I was saving because it referred back to the beginning. And that was a clarification on a question.
Sure.
And what Snuneymuxw words, how do they refer to Gabriola?
As I remember Dave showed us a book show that book again, Dave.
It's called the Snuneymuxw People.
Show it. Show it.
And that's at Eldorado Road or Eldorado Drive, is it called? Or
El Verano?
Yeah, El Verano Drive. Yeah, that was one of the village sites that was there. But I'd heard that we had 17 locations with names on Gabriola. So there's considerable amount. But this one here gives a good representation of the name of the Snuneymuxw. And it's that W sound with the E above the glottal E. Snuneymuxw. Yes. So of course we have several other names for the different areas. Even Indian Point has a different traditional name for it. And if anyone ever got a chance to look at one of our maps that we had, our old maps, it gives some of the good references to all the village names on the island. Here's the map here.
The Gabriola Museum has an excellent
That's
map.
right. Yeah, they have a copy of it.
Names.
But this is a good map here with some of the names that are on there because there's so many different names. When you look at the arrows on the end down there in the south, there are so many names on there. But some of them you need to have knowledge of the Hokaminum or linguist in order to pronounce some of these names. Like Twin Beaches there has quite a name to it too. But again, as we continue towards reconciliation, it's hoping that we will be able to introduce more language classes to Gabriola in different ways. And I try to refer to the language every time I'm doing a cultural tour or something.
As we're getting close to wrapping up, and it takes a minute to type a question, does anyone have anything they would like to ask Bill, ask Dave, a comment of any sort? We'll leave a couple of minutes for that. Bill, I have a question for you.
Sure.
If we were to only take one thing away from this presentation, what would you say would be the most important thing for us to remember?
I think that I love the idea that I quoted heavily from Dan George and Chief Seattle. Overall, I think that it's important this is what I am very conscious of whenever I work with a PowerPoint, more so now than 5 years ago, 6 years ago. But because I've worked with our old people since the 70s, I understand that the Snuneymuxw and the Coast Salish in particular belong to a living culture. The traditions, the values are constantly used and reinforced. And these are the living culture is reflected in the art form and carving and basket weaving, etc., food gathering. And so I think that that seems to be the most important items, and certainly what I'm conscious of whenever I reflect on preparing a new PowerPoint, for example. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. That was excellent. People are writing in the chat. Thank you very much. It was very informative. Thank you for continuing to share your knowledge. Again, thank you for sharing with us today. Thank you for giving us the gifts of your time and knowledge and trusting us to receive it with open hearts. And I'd say that pretty much says it all. Thank you both for your time today and for sharing your knowledge and for making these presentations possible. And Dave is going to symbolically Zoom-like present you with a handshake from the Gabriola Arts Council. So thank you very much, Bill. If you can see that on your screen.
Thank you.
And an envelope for you.
Okay, thank you.
That will make its way to you soon.
Okay, thank you so much.
And we have one for Dave as well, that he already has. So, Heichka.
If I may, first, thank you so much for your great interest and your kindness. I know that in my work with the Simon Fraser team, I'm relying heavily on their advice because they've worked with the Gabriola people much longer than I have in terms of how do we grapple with the real interest that on Gabriola of language and traditions and culture. And it's something that we will talk as we move along and find ways in which they can be applied. Certainly my skills have been, my entire professional career has been working across cultures. And so whilst I could not answer directly, I am very conscious of your questions. Thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. And we'll say goodbye to everyone. Thank you for joining us. And we have our final presentation is next Monday. You can use the same link for that one.
Awesome.
Okay, take care.
See everyone next week. Okay, awesome.
Bye now.